On the west coast of the Iberian Peninsula sits Portugal. Known for their footballers, piri-piri chicken, and custard tarts, the Portuguese have a fairly innocuous impact on the world today. But not that long ago, Portugal competed with the biggest European powers, and it could be said they are responsible for the international society we enjoy today. So, how did Portugal change the world? Portugal's extensive coastline means fishing was, and is, an important part of the Portuguese lifestyle. Today, Portugal is among the countries with the most fish consumption per capita. Back in the early 1300s, Portugal was on the edge of the known world. It is no wonder that the sailors who fished the waters of the Atlantic Ocean were curious about what lay beyond the horizon. As it was much quicker and more practical to travel and trade over the water rather than over land, the Portuguese evolved the process of shipbuilding, making boats more suitable for long journeys and large cargo. Determined to find new trade routes into Africa, the Portuguese began exploring the northwestern coast of Africa, starting with the Canary Islands. Soon, Portugal was producing world-changing explorers and would become the leading force during the Age of Discovery. During the 1420s, Portuguese Prince Henry cemented Portugal's maritime legacy. Although dubbed Henry the Navigator by the English, he never actually embarked on any voyages himself. However, he was a passionate patron of adventure in the name of trade, and financed many expeditions along the west coast of Africa, trading gold and enslaved people and looking for islands that would be profitable to colonize. The expeditions funded by Henry sailed farther south than any other Europeans of their time and started mapping the west coast of Africa for the Portuguese. Henry's promotion of seafaring exploration kicked off the Age of Discovery, changing the world forever. João Gonçalves Zarco was among the first explorers to navigate the waters off the Portuguese and West African coasts. At an early age, Zarco was in the service of Prince Henry the Navigator and commanded the small maneuverable ships called caravels. Along with Tristan Vaz Teixeira and Bartolomeu Perestrelo, Zarco is the official discoverer of the archipelago of Madeira. After being blown off course while sailing the coast of Africa around 1418, they came across an island they called Porto Santo. Prince Henry then ordered them to settle the island, but after a rabbit outbreak that devastated crops, they moved from Porto Santo to a nearby island that would be later known as Madeira. During the late 1420s, the Portuguese discovered the island archipelago of the Azores. The relatively unknown Diogo de Silves was the first to sight the islands in 1427. Little is known about his discovery. How and why he ended up on the islands is uncertain. But not long after, a monk called Goncalo Velo Cabral was sent to determine the location of the islands, which went on to be colonized by the Portuguese. In 1482, Portuguese navigator Diogo Cao became the first European to officially find the mouth of the Congo River. He set up two stone pillars, one at the mouth of the Congo and one at the Cape Santa Maria, to denote Portuguese dominance of the lands. The Portuguese were one of the first colonial powers of the Age of Exploration, sailing into unknown lands and claiming them as their own. Inspired by these successes, the Portuguese navigators pushed on, extending the edges of the known world and seeking more far-reaching trade routes. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias became the first European to sail around the Cape of Good Hope. This journey opened trade routes to Asia over the Atlantic and Indian Oceans and would open up many possibilities for sea travel. John II ordered Dias to find the southernmost point of Africa after Cao had failed to do so. Dias took 3 ships and some experienced pilots who had previously traveled with Cao. He then planned to follow the coast, but harsh weather forced him to sail away from land, and he continued out of sight of the shore for several days. When Dias did turn again towards where he thought the coastline would be, he did not sight land until he continued sailing north. Like many celebrities in the Age of Exploration, he unwittingly achieved his goal and sailed around the Cape of Good Hope without even realizing it. While Dias wanted to press on, his crew and officers insisted on turning back, and it was on this return journey that Dias sighted the Cape. Later, Dias would sail with other important Portuguese explorers, including Vasco da Gama and Pedro Alvarez Cabral, before he died when his ship was lost during an ill-fated voyage around the Cape of Good Hope. Probably the most famous explorer to live in Portugal was Christopher Columbus. However, Portugal did not finance his expedition to South America. In this instance, the Portuguese's understanding of navigating the known world worked against them. The King's Advisory Committee correctly surmised that Columbus would not be able to reach the Indies by sailing across the Atlantic. Their calculations showed that the distance would be too great for European vessels to travel, as they would have nowhere to make port on the way. Little did they know that there were two continents between the Atlantic and the Pacific. But the Portuguese supported many explorers in endeavors they felt would be a success. Vasco da Gama was one such navigator who achieved fame through seafaring exploration. The son of a provincial nobleman, little is known of da Gama before he was 32, at which time King John II sent him to seize French ships at Setúbal and the Algarve in retaliation for attacks against Portuguese vessels. Da Gama completed the task effectively, and after King Manuel ascended to the throne in 1495, da Gama was chosen to lead a Portuguese fleet and establish a trade route to India. Why da Gama was chosen is unknown, as despite his previous success, he was relatively inexperienced in leading an expedition. Da Gama's first voyage, from 1497 to 1499, was markedly successful. He navigated around the Cape of Good Hope and was the first European to reach India via the Atlantic Ocean, visiting trading cities like Mozambique and Kenya along the way. Da Gama's reception in India was not particularly warm, and the Muslim merchants tried to stop him from leaving Calicut, forcing him to fight his way out of the harbor. In 1502, da Gama was again dispatched to India to establish Portuguese supremacy, where he successfully forged alliances and secured Portuguese rule. Shortly before he died, he was named the Portuguese viceroy in India, and his efforts opened up the sea route between Western Europe and India. Less well-known are the Portuguese explorers João Fernandes Lavrador and Pero de Barcelos. They were the first Europeans to explore large areas of northeastern North America, including Labrador in 1498. Fernandes Lavrador is better known for being instrumental in advancing the slave trade when, in 1445, he heard from Moroccan nomads that the African kings would sell conquered tribespeople as slaves. When Prince Henry the Navigator learned this information, the Portuguese stopped haphazardly capturing people to enslave through coastal raids and instead made agreements with the Moorish and African chiefs. This new method of acquiring enslaved people made the Portuguese slave trade less risky and more profitable, paving the way for the transatlantic slave trade. Other Portuguese explorers were sent to North America in the hope of establishing a northwest passage to India. After the surprising success of Columbus's voyage, the Portuguese king Manuel offered grants to those willing to cross the Atlantic in the name of Portugal. Two brothers of the noble Corte family, Gaspar and Miguel, took the opportunity to undertake an expedition in 1500. First, Gaspar sailed with a fleet of 3 ships to Greenland, where he explored the shoreline until the winter weather forced him to return to Portugal. Gaspar's second voyage included his brother Miguel, and they sailed the coast of Labrador. After sending Miguel home, Gaspar was lost exploring the American shoreline. In 1502, Miguel was also lost searching for his brother. Due to the many Portuguese and Spanish expeditions to the Americas, the Treaty of Tordesillas was drawn up, essentially splitting the continents between these two maritime powers. Despite the Spanish-born Pope Alexander VI endorsing this treaty, none of the other European powers took much notice of it, and they all felt that lands in the Americas were fair game. In 1500, another Portuguese explorer was about to make a name for himself. Pedro Álvares Cabral was named admiral of 13 ships destined to follow da Gama's route to India. Cabral was instructed to sail southwest to avoid the calm waters off the coast of Guinea, and in doing so became the first known European to set foot in Brazil. Nearly 20 years later, a Portuguese explorer defined the world's size and its ocean's vastness. Ferdinand Magellan set out with his fleet in 1519. When he found a strait between the Atlantic and the Pacific, Magellan achieved what Christopher Columbus had hoped to attain. Now called the Strait of Magellan, it was an important route for ships until the completion of the Panama Canal in 1914. Magellan's legacy is highly contested, but the journey he orchestrated undoubtedly changed the world. Although Magellan was Portuguese, he sailed to South America under the Spanish flag. Magellan's motivation for the expedition was to find a westward route to the Spice Islands in Indonesia. The Portuguese King Manuel thought this to be a fruitless or spiceless endeavor, as they already had established trade with the islands. Another issue with the proposed route was that Magellan's voyage would probably pass through Spanish-controlled areas, as set out in the Treaty of Tordesillas. Magellan had also fallen out of favor with King Manuel I over accusations of illegal trading. The Spanish were more than happy to fund Magellan, as Portugal dominated trade in the area at the time, and finding a route that came within their jurisdiction would suit them nicely. But although this voyage would prove that it was possible to circumnavigate the globe by boat, it also demonstrated how dangerous it was and that the Earth was much bigger than anyone had surmised. Only 1 out of 5 ships made it back to Spain, and Magellan himself was killed in the Philippines, meaning that he never actually made it all the way around the world. An interesting side note is that an enslaved man called Enrique, who was aboard one of the ships, may have been one of the first to circumnavigate the globe. Upon their arrival in the Philippines, the Spanish crew was surprised to find that Enrique spoke the native language, suggesting that he was originally from that region. The voyages financed by Portugal undoubtedly had a global impact. Trade in India and Asia increased, and islands and continents were discovered, affecting the native people and those across Europe. From the early expeditions that sparked the age of exploration and the race to exploit lands previously untouched by Europe to the charting of the entire globe, the Portuguese navigators' unabashed lust for adventure and discovery changed the world. The Portuguese and Spanish empires were the first global empires that spanned different continents, leading to other European powers competing for a piece of the action. Whether you see it as a positive or negative, we owe our progression towards a global society to those men who were prepared to sail off into the unknown to find new lands. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Portugal voyages, check out our book, The Portuguese Empire, a captivating guide to the history of Portugal as a colonial power and its colonies in Asia, North and South America, and Oceania. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.